no constitution is ever written by human hands, that all constitutions are written onto people's hearts by God. And constitutions aren't pieces of paper. They're literally the way that we are constituted as a people. They come from our traditions, they come from our beliefs, they come from our religion, they come from our folkways. And when we write them down, we're really just capturing, taking a snapshot of what we believe and how we live our lives in the moment.
Let's go. From Newsweek, hedge fund billionaire warns U.S. is entering civil war. And Vox.com asks, is America on the brink of civil war? Now, they've removed of civil war from their headline now. And it's kind of funny because they brought on this woman, Barbara F. Walter, who then basically says, claiming that a civil war is possible is the problem itself. She says people like Laura Loomer and Steve Bannon go straight to civil war language. So did Vox.com. The divide is clear. We are seeing people on the left defend Charlie Kirk's killing. I have got a death threat that I just read out a moment on the previous segment, at least a portion of. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I've been in contact with the FBI, and the DOJ has announced the arrest of a man who sent a threatening letter to Benny Johnson threatening to kill him. I have been in contact with the FBI about similar threats that we have received here at Timcast, and we are taking all of these threats very seriously. It is escalating. Donald Trump has called for the jailing of Governor Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson, and Pritzker says, come and get me. Trump has sent in Texas National Guard into Illinois. Holy crap. It is escalating, my friends. Now, to get another opinion on this, we're going to be joined by Auron MacIntyre, commentator. Let me pull up the room with Auron. Here we go. Got it. And we'll get the camera going. Boot it up. Hopefully it works. And it is currently loading. It's giving me the business. There we go. Auron, can you hear me?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. How are you, sir?
Doing well, doing well.
So we've got, there's big news right now about Israel-Palestine. It seems to be dominating the news. However, over the past weekend, we've seen an escalation of riots. Far leftists have descended on Portland. They've been in Chicago, and it's gone beyond the riots. There are, of course, weird scenes coming out of Portland of people dressed like animals, which I think is propaganda efforts. But in Illinois, there's something particularly interesting. A video where a man being arrested by ICE is helped by bystanders escape. And the ICE officers give up and let him go. This guy's yelling, "Ayúdame," and the people obliged and let him go. Trump is sending in Texas National Guard into Illinois to assist with these immigration enforcement, while the people of Illinois are actually fighting against ICE. And the governor says, "Come and get me," threatening Trump, daring Trump to actually arrest him. Now, Ray Dalio has said that we are entering a new kind of civil war. And even Vox.com today published an article, "Is the U.S. on the brink of civil war?" I, of course, have talked about this for some time, but I'm curious your thoughts on what is currently going on.
Well, I think when a lot of people think about the Civil War, they think about two sides, formal armies, uniforms, generals, a command structure. They think of a separate government that's somehow been declared. And it's not civil war until you get to that point. If we're going by that definition, no, I don't think we're going to probably see that anytime soon. However, most people don't remember that the American Civil War didn't start with two different sides and different uniforms and generals. It didn't even start at Fort Sumter. The American Civil War really started in the border states. A lot of people have forgotten the story of Bleeding Kansas, where you have these different states that were territories, but they had to enter into the United States. And when they did so, they had to vote whether to be slave or free. And so both sides, the abolitionists and the pro-slavery side, recognized that every state added to the Union would put things on their side, right? It would tip the balance in Congress representation. So they all moved. A bunch of people from each side moved into places like Kansas. And once each side recognized that they were both artificially kind of boosting the ballot box by moving to these places and messing with the vote, we actually got running gun battles. We got actual full-on conflict between these two sides. They weren't paramilitary organizations. No one had a leadership. No one was assigned to any specific government organization. But this became so famous that, again, we call this period now Bleeding Kansas because of the amount of violence, just civilian on civilian, non-government authorized violence that occurred in these border skirmishes. And I think what we're looking at here is something similar. We're probably not going to see the formal declaration of civil war anytime soon, but I think we will see escalating violence in what could be a pre-Civil War type of maneuver.
Maybe. I agree with 99% of what you're saying. The reason why I think there's a possibility this could be different is digital communications, the speed at which communications travel. And so I've been thinking a lot about this, and you're absolutely right about Bleeding Kansas. It certainly feels like we are in this period where you've got, I mean, one, the killing of Charlie Kirk, the riots and the protests at federal facilities. However, Trump is sending in National Guard from Texas into other states already, which when you look at the history of the Civil War, we didn't really get that. And the structure of government was a bit different. So it's after, Fort Sumter, they say, was the beginning of the American Civil War, but it wasn't really even a thing. One person died. It was an accident. Nobody was actually trying to kill each other. And then you had the Battle of Bull Run, where people still thought we were not going to be in a civil war. After that, after that, Lincoln then says, we're going to rally a bunch of troops and send them into the South and quell the rebellion. 4 more states then secede. And all this took kind of a long time, took months. But with the speed of communications, a judge's ruling is overnight. Trump responds overnight, and the public reacts in an instant. So we're at a point now in this country where we may have entered Bleeding Kansas in the past couple of years when we saw, Andrew Yang was saying, I'm going to move to Georgia to influence the election, as you described with these other states. So maybe these past several years with the Trump first administration can be described as that period of civil strife, violence in the streets. But with the movement of Texas troops into Illinois, it looks like we are on the precipice of something more serious.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, ultimately, like you say, we have basically collapsing decision space, right? The faster that information moves, the more that decisions are made quickly, the less likely they are to have any kind of public evaluation. We don't go through any kind of democratic process. We don't have a national conversation. It just feels like things happen, right? And momentum builds very quickly. And of course, the faster momentum builds with less time for people to have conversations, work things out, go through any formal process, then the likelihood of running into one of these calamitous, so someone fires around at the wrong time, a National Guardsman gets spooked, they get rushed,
Yep.
Some Antifa guy decides to get really violent and there's some kind of shooting in the crowd. These things can all spiral out of control very quickly. But we also have to remember that at the same time, Eisenhower and JFK sent, the 101st Airborne in, to southern states to force the issue of segregation, right? So it's not the first time that we've had a full-on, not just National Guard, but like Army, military deployed into the United States and forcing action on other Americans, and that did not result in civil war. I do think you're right that this time is probably a little different, but it's not like tensions were exactly low during segregation and attempts to integrate in the South as well. So I don't want to jump to the end and say that this has to be radically different, but I will say that if nothing else, we are at least at that level of tension and possible conflict, which was already extremely high at the time.
Are you familiar? I talked about this morning. Are you familiar with the graphic novel I Am Legend?
I've seen the movie, but I never.
Oh, the movie's terrible. Just forget you even saw it. The general idea, and I'm probably getting this wrong. It's been so long since I've read it. The general idea is you got a vampire hunter. He goes around during the day when the vampires in their coffins. He kills vampires, but the vampires are winning. By the end of the story, society is all vampires. Cities are all run by vampires. The government is all vampires, and he gets captured and arrested. And he's looking out of a jail cell, and there's a vampire citizen walks by and sees him, terrified. This look of fear in his face. And that's when he realizes he is the monster of myth and legend that lurks while people sleep and kills them in their beds. The general idea is his world is gone. The world that he was fighting for doesn't exist anymore. And so I use an example because what we're seeing right now with Chicago, for instance, I watched this shocking and terrifying video. It's a man ICE is trying to arrest him. And he's yelling "Ayúdame" and resisting arrest. And people help him. What's terrifying about it is we recognize the authority of ICE and CBP. We voted for Trump to enforce immigration law. But in these jurisdictions, like in Chicago, not only do people not fear the authority of the federal government, they view it as illegitimate and come to the aid of the man who is resisting arrest and in violation of our laws. Zoran Mamdani vowed in his campaign in New York to defend his community from Trump's ICE. What is he saying? He's saying, me and my people, we're not part of your country. What you voted for, what you seek to enforce, we are opposed to and will resist and reject. But what's scary about it is his statement is basically saying there is a voting bloc large enough in New York that believes we are a separate national entity to the federal government, that our community must be defended from them. It's at this point people need to realize there actually are factions. We'll call them whatever you want, but they are there in front of us. I'm curious if you see similarly.
Yeah, I think, if we think about how laws work, right? We assume often people on the right, conservatives, will say, well, a law is written down. And if a law is written down, then people just have to follow it. That's just how it works. But of course, that's not how laws get enforced. We can't actually compel the vast majority of the population to obey the law all of the time. The reason that laws that ultimately work is that the majority of people agree with the law. They follow the law. They do it voluntarily. No one has to put a gun to their head. The spirit of the law goes along with their beliefs, their way of being, their tradition, their understanding, their morality. A few people have to be compelled because that's always the case, but you can't force it on everyone. And this is why it's really important that when you make laws, you have a shared basis of morality and tradition and understanding how this should work, right? Because you can't force it down on everybody. When we had this situation, again, to make the comparison with the last Civil War, you had, of course, a period of Reconstruction after the Civil War. And it's basically long-term military occupation of the South. And the reason they did that is, well, they did not trust the South to actually follow the law. They felt like they had to compel them at force to do this. And even after Reconstruction ended, we basically oriented our entire society, our system of laws, the way the 14th Amendment, everything we did to the Constitution after, we oriented it to basically allow the North to force those things onto the South. Now, again, you might think that's bad, you might think that's good, but it is very instructive for us to now look at what we're doing here, right? Because even with all the force of the government, it took basically 100 years for all of the things that the North wanted to kind of compel on the South to take. And even then, there's still conflict, right? There's still some kind of tension in ways between the South and the rest of the United States, which is why every Northerner's favorite joke is how dumb the South is, right? And so now you have the scenario where it's kind of the roles are reversed, right? We have troops from the South, from Texas, having to go to Illinois and compel them to follow these same rules. In some way, we are reconstructing these liberal areas. And that can only go on for so long because, like we said, that it's not usually successful unless you have the shared belief. So as long as people in Portland and in Illinois have these radically different beliefs, they must be compelled by force to follow the law because everything else about their society works against it.
This is the free speech challenge. The idea of free speech only works in a society that is homogenous for the most part. I talked with a lot of people about the Constitution and their belief in it, liberal, conservative, otherwise. And, well, when the First Amendment is ratified, blasphemy was still illegal in most parts of the country. You go outside and blaspheme, you get arrested. You couldn't swear obscenity. I think a good example of a legal breakdown is in, I know this sounds pretty gross and silly, but public defecation. You shouldn't, the joke is whenever you see a sign at a workplace, it means something happened. So if there's a sign saying, like don't steal food from the fridge, it's because someone did. If the sign says don't take a dump on the floor, you're like, what? Why do you need a sign for that? So why do we need to write down a law that says do not defecate in public? The problem is over a long enough period of time, people began doing it. The problem we have now is when you look at San Francisco, they allow it. So that is a silly, it's kind of a gross and absurd way to look at it, but I think it really matters because it's something so incredibly basic. You can't drop trow in the middle of the street and just go off. But in Democrat-run cities, it's happening all the time and no enforcement happens. So there's already a distinct worldview, right? Because we'd be like, that's ridiculous. But it is happening and they're allowing it to happen. Where it gets more serious is when we write a law saying you can't enter the country illegally. You have to go through a port of entry. But now we're seeing in New York, California, Oregon, all these blue jurisdictions, not only are they saying come here and we'll protect you, clearly showing a mirror image of the rule of law. In some instances, they're trying to grant them the right to vote. And so to go back to that, I am legend scenario, we are talking about a military occupation. And I think people listening need to understand that it may not be explicitly stated, but the general functioning of government right now is that Democrats and Republicans are two distinct nations trying to occupy the same space. So when Democrats in Illinois say Trump is in violation of the Constitution, Republicans then say, no, he's not. He's doing everything legally. That argument is meaningless. It's like trying to argue with France about their laws affecting our country. One way I put it is, in the UK, they threatened to extradite and deport Americans for their speech. And we all laughed. You can't come and arrest an American. That's how Democrats feel about Trump right now, that he's trying to effectively do something so absurd. But with all that, do you see a possibility that this could de-escalate things? Like maybe Trump occupies these places as a form, as one way to describe it. And then over the period of 10 or 20 years, things calm down and we go back to normal.
It's possible. To piggyback off your last point, there's a thinker, Joseph de Maistre, and he said that no constitution is ever written by human hands, that all constitutions are written onto people's hearts by God. And constitutions aren't pieces of paper. They're literally the way that we are constituted as a people. They come from our traditions. They come from our beliefs. They come from our religion. They come from our folkways. And when we write them down, we're really just taking a snapshot of what we believe and how we live our lives in the moment. So like you said, if the original Constitution was a snapshot of what our founders believed and how they lived their lives and the type of people they were, if we look at our current world, it simply does not align with that, right? The left does not believe those things. And that's why we get two radically different pictures of the Constitution, because we're looking at it in a way that I think is closer to what the founders looked at it like, though we have still changed over time. But the left has a completely different understanding of the Constitution. And so when they interpret it, nothing has changed in the words, but the way they live their lives is so radically different that for them, the Constitution is the way they live their lives, not the words on paper. So you can't just wave it in front of them and say, hey, do this, because that doesn't mean anything to them. So I think the difficulty with trying to de-escalate right now is how differently we see the world, how fundamentally different our values, our identities, our everything about us is. And so as we saw again with the North, there are ways to compel people to do this, right? We did it to Nazi Germany after World War II in Japan, right? We went in and we occupied those nations and we forced them to, become, we did the whole anti-fascism crusade. We forced all this out of kind of their worldviews. We made it illegal to have any reference to their histories or their beliefs. Wow. We know how to do this, but none of it is very pretty. So can we do it? Maybe. Do we have the political will? Like, does the MAGA right or do congressional Republicans really have the will to full on occupy these cities and force out these anti-fascist terroristic elements? Like, would an average Republican actually take a step like that? Because that's what would be necessary.
Well, that could actually escalate things, right?
It could.
So it's a rock and a hard place. It's hard to map out your path. I think philosophically, I think one of the challenges we have is educating. One thing we have failed to do in this country is educate people on philosophy, morals, and the morality of philosophy, right? So people on the left, they hear that Trump's going to deport a guy who's been here for 20 years, and they say that is wrong. And Trump, by doing so, is a tyrant and a dictator. When Trump is doing what is asked of him by his voters in the majority, or I should at least say the plurality. He won the election. He won the popular vote. He's got Congress. The will of the people be done, right? Trump isn't simply going up and saying, I know everyone hates me. I'm going to do whatever I want. The issue is, as it pertains to securing Illinois or Oregon or California, there is no reality where you simply walk in and say, would you kindly follow the law? Because if the law was something like you had to sacrifice children to Moloch, people are going to fight you to their bloody end to stop that from happening. And so there's a lot of people who don't get, we wouldn't need any police at all if this country all shared the moral worldview of Charlie Kirk. Imagine literally every single person believed what Charlie believed. There'd be no murder. There'd be no theft. There'd be no crime. There'd be civil courts because sometimes people have disputes. But as a society becomes more factionalized in their backing ideologies, their religion or otherwise, through the system created by the founding fathers, eventually you'll get Dearborn, Michigan with female circumcision in a country that makes it illegal, and people on the left defending the right to their cultural practices. So what do? If you don't want it in your country, you force people to stop. To those who are engaged in those practices that we ban, they'll say that's tyranny. That's oppression.
Yeah, like you said, people live in a certain way, and it doesn't change because they stepped on American soil. There's nothing magical about the dirt in Michigan. If you take someone who doesn't believe in American values, isn't Christian, has a radically different way of life, and you move them there, they will just live that life unless you go through a truly authoritarian level of demands to force them to do this. And this is the problem with multiculturalism. As you say, a homogenous population shares a worldview. They share an experience. They share a tradition. They might have disagreements inside of it, but it's much closer than ones that are radically different because they come from far different ways, have different religions, have different faiths, understandings, philosophies, all of these things. And so the farther apart the different people inside of your community are, the more authoritarian the government has to become. Mm-hmm. So if you're asking, the average person, they're saying, well, we can have a multiracial, multi-ethnic country, right? Well, there are successful versions of this. You can look at something like Singapore, right? They have a high degree of diversity across the board. They also will kill you for dealing drugs. They'll cane you for spitting gum on the sidewalk. They know how to force everyone to behave exactly the same way so that civilization can run. That is an option. I don't know if that's the way I want to live, but if you're talking about a highly diverse, population with all these different traditions, that tends to be the thing that wins out at the end.
Well, this is the reality, right? I don't have to worry about you, nor anyone you know, dropping trout in the middle of the street and taking a dump. And so in a place like Singapore, when they say don't chew gum and don't spit the gum is banned, you get caned for these infractions. There's public shame if you don't throw away your trash or don't flush a toilet. It's exaggerated, but when I went to Singapore, they said, if you don't flush the toilet, someone will go in and check the stall after you leave and you'll get shamed. But they will mercilessly beat you for violating their rules. Here's the thing. Most of the people don't ever get beaten because they don't break the rules. They have this strict enforcement for the people who are outside of their worldview. It's easy to act like the perfect world is going to be this, multicultural society where we all hold hands. But there are Islamic cultural norms that are completely at odds with the West that they will not tolerate. So as it goes for immigration, I'm curious if you want to elaborate on, what we've been seeing with mass migration. Actually, let me say this, because you brought up a good point, and I think I'm looking at the world right now in a very interesting, this divide in an interesting way. Democrats, when in power, are going to allow illegal immigrants into the country and allow them to stay permanently. They will traffic children. We saw it under Biden already. There is no more tolerance for this among the right. Would the right win, they will deport these people. Nothing is going to change the minds of either of these nations. They're two distinct nations at this point trying to occupy the same territory or similar territories. This means, in my view, if the Democrats are to get back power, they will make an attempt to militaristically occupy right-leaning places to protect illegal immigrants, as we are seeing the inverse. It seems like the only outcome there is going to be violent resistance at some point to whoever's in charge.
Yeah, I think that the mass immigration issue really highlights the existential nature, unfortunately, of the political divide. As you point out, every illegal immigrant that a Democrat brings in obviously increases their eventual voting power. It increases their ability to give handouts to these people and secure power. It dilutes your vote. It ensures all of this different, ethnic enclaves that kind of get erected in these areas and can be peddled to by different Democratic politicians. As we now see people like Ilhan Omar promising to do what she can for Somalia, right? The United States is just kind of a place you go to raid the treasury and get the benefits. You're not part of the country. You're not actually assimilating all of these things. That's now very common. And if that is allowed to continue to happen, then we can see the danger, because Joe Biden brought in, 8 million people, at least probably during his open borders scheme. And Trump, even if he goes just ham on the deportations, would be lucky to get half of those people out. So for every 2 Biden lets in, if we go absolutely to the wall on the issue, we might get half of them out. And that means that if we switch presidents every 8 years, the Democrats are just on an inevitable winning streak, right?
Yep.
And so both sides recognize that if this is the game, then winning is everything. Because if you don't stop it, you don't use force, then they're going to continue to do this and the loss is inevitable.
I wouldn't be surprised if we get to a point where, we've got Newsom fighting over control of the National Guard, Pritzker, same thing. I wouldn't be surprised if, actually, you know what? I'm going to pause pause right there. We're actually already here. I was going to say that Democrats would offer some kind of amnesty or sanctuary to illegal immigrants if they aid in resisting the federal government. And then I was like, oh, no, they already do. And they've been doing it for decades with sanctuary policies that have expanded into sanctuary state policies. We're getting to the point now where run-of-the-mill people in the streets are fighting ICE officers to stop them from deporting people. This video I mentioned where the guy's yelling, ayúdame, and help me in Spanish, and the people actually do. So we're already there. Democrats are saying, stop the feds, you get sanctuary here. Now, to be fair, we're not formally in this period, but I do think we are dangerously close to a point where we've already seen illegal immigrant police officers in places like Minnesota. I wouldn't be surprised if in the coming years, we see a place like Illinois say, if you help us repel ICE and shut them down and obstruct them, we will grant you sanctuary, which ultimately could get exacerbated to the point where if we do enter a civil war, an actual formal war where maybe Trump has to federalize local police departments, he occupies Chicago and says, we're in command now and there's troops, there's Marines. Then you get Democrats saying, join us undocumented, formally as fighters, and we will grant you citizenship when we win. I think that's the likely direction should this go into full-scale civil war.
Yeah, again, that's far from unprecedented when you look at, again, our first Civil War, Lincoln bringing in plenty of Irish and sending them directly to the front lines, basically importing new troops to fight people in the South, right? But we also know that ultimately we've seen this cycle of civilizations for things like the Roman Empire, where you have a large number of Goths who end up entering into the military leadership of the empire, and that ends up being eventually the majority of the people who are actually in armed service. And very soon you have a situation where very few Romans are actually going to war for Rome. And this is increasingly true in the United States, whether it be in the military or in the police department. They're having trouble recruiting a lot of heritage Americans. To be frankly, to be clear, often it's the most dangerous thing in the world to be a white cop on the beat, because as soon as you bust somebody, you're going to end up getting charged with racism and everything. It's much easier if you're a minority, though even then, that doesn't necessarily stop you from getting criticized and getting civil rights lawsuits for different arrests. But ultimately, we see that a lot of these military and police forces are drawing more and more on populations of either early immigrants or possibly even illegal immigrants in the case of law enforcement. And so I think it is entirely reasonable to worry about the idea that they could grant citizenship or extra benefits to foreigners who are coming in fighting for them. This is why we always point out that immigration is largely fighting age young men. It matters that they are military young men for the most part. They're not bringing most of their women. They're not bringing their children. They're not bringing their families. It's guys in their early 20s, early 30s. They're the ones that are coming across the border with no jobs, no way to pay for anything, no support network, and they are very, very vulnerable to different people who could offer them opportunities, be it pay or anything else, if they would do what they're the fighting for them.
What's funny is I saw the story that a Republican bought Dominion voting systems. I haven't read too much into it, but I'm seeing a lot of liberals sharing this story in panic. Because for the longest time, of course, the right, our people on the right, I should say, argued that Dominion was rigging the election or something like that. Well, the left and liberals said that's not true, and you're lying, and you're crazy, and you're conspiracy theorists. Now there's a story they're all sharing where they say a Republican bought Dominion, and they're going, oh no. Like, oh no, what? Oh no, the implication is Republicans will rig the elections now, win everything, and just control this country from now on, creating some kind of American empire. But my response is just, I thought Dominion didn't control elections. Why are they freaking out? I think it's fair to say, though, based on the moves Trump is making, there is a major point being made in his policies pertaining to the midterm elections and the upcoming presidential election to ensure every structural piece is in place that will guarantee a Republican victory. And if Democrats are going to make the argument the election's being stolen, I don't know what to expect. But Auron, I appreciate you joining me. We're out of time. Where can people find you?
Yes, I'm over on Blaze TV. Of course, the Auron MacIntyre Show is on YouTube and Rumble and all your favorite podcast platforms. And of course, I'm over on Twitter at Auron MacIntyre.
Right on, brother. Thanks for hanging out. We'll have to have you on again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Right on. That was the great Auron MacIntyre, of course, as we discussed a lot of these issues. We could probably talk for another 2 hours on all of these issues, but I think we need to do like a deep dive 3 or 4 hour discussion. I should write out a bunch of bullet points on issues of the Civil War, the American Civil War, possible Civil War. These points about, Democrats basically making the argument that Trump is gearing up to rig the election using Dominion is why they're saying it. And it's funny because they said you can't. Now they fear you can. And it's not everybody when I say they, it's a handful of liberals I see on X. But maybe. We're going to wait and see, I suppose. Smash the like button, share the show. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. We've got more coming up for you tonight at 8 p.m. Timcast IRL is back. Let me see if I've got who do we got lined up on the October 13th. Peter Navarro will be joining us, which will be interesting because, they locked him up. And Auron actually will be joining us for the Culture War this Friday. So should be very interesting. I'll leave it there, my friends. Thanks for hanging out. Smash the like button. We're going to get you ready for the next raid. And I don't know if we have Russell Brand. I think he's been off for some time. Yeah, he's not currently streaming. So we might have, I believe Devory is going live right now. Devory Darkins, I got to hang out with when I was traveling, who's absolutely amazing. Really great work, Devory. He is live now. So we'll get you guys on over to hang out with Devory. I recommend it. If you haven't seen him, you got to see him. He's a good dude, smart dude, knows what he's talking about. Thanks for hanging out. And other than that, we will see you all tonight, 8 p.m., Timcast IRL.